one of the key signature policies of the Trump administration, his tariff policies. Well, just today, a federal appeals court allowed the president to continue collecting tariffs, remember, under that emergency powers law. For now, key two words there, as his administration appeals an order striking down the bulk of his signature set of economic policies. Our colleague and friend there, Fox News' Connor Hansen, with more details. Let's listen.
President Trump's sweeping tariffs are back on thanks to a ruling by a federal appeals court. It comes after the U.S. Court of International Trade threatened to stop or delay most of the reciprocal and baseline tariffs announced earlier this year.
Last night, the Trump administration faced another example of judicial overreach.
President Trump has been using an emergency powers law to impose tariffs. The trade court ruled it doesn't give the president, quote, unbounded authority. But the administration says it's confident its plan will work.
We are very, very confident that we're going to get this positive result, and we're even more confident that we're going to win in the end. You got to understand that Jameson Greer, the U.S. Trade Representative, is the smartest trade lawyer on earth, and that he chose this as the best option.
The White House says the court ruling did not delay any of its pending trade deals. It's holding talks with Japan and expects a delegation from India to come to Washington next week. Wall Street is watching closely, and major U.S. companies are waiting to see how it all shakes out. The CEO of General Motors says the automaker is moving forward with expanding U.S. production.
There's certain moves that we're already making to strengthen our North America manufacturing because we can do that with the clarity we already have.
The appeals court gave the Trump administration until June 9th to submit its arguments. In New York, Connor Hansen, Fox News.
Connor, thanks so much. Let's bring into the conversation right now our friend there at the American Institute for Economic Research, Lydia Mashburn-Newman. She joins me. Lydia, so good to see you here. Boy, there's a lot to get to. Now, I'm going to characterize this. I said topsy-turvy, but I want to ask you this. How can the global markets, how can the U.S. economy, how can business owners here and those who do business outside the United States with the United States, how can they keep up if the tariff policies are changing day by day?
Yeah, I think for the most part, markets had started to settle with just the changes coming from the administration itself, kind of getting to a place of comfort that, yes, the rates may change from day to day, but at the end of the day, we'll probably end up with at least a 10% tariff. But whether that was going to take 30, 60, 90 days or another additional 90 days after the initial move out of those Liberation Day dates, so markets kind of got a little settled around that. And then we've had these court cases, and it seemed that the markets were actually kind of pleased with some of the reining in, that there were two cases that came out recently, today and yesterday, sort of saying, hey, we are not sure that you have the authority, the administration has the authority under the rules that they have proposed to actually enact these tariffs as they stand. So that introduces a new layer of uncertainty, but at the same time, if it means a reprieve on tariffs, that type of uncertainty can be a positive and a boon, especially for our financial markets, where folks get pretty excited to think that that the dampening effects of tariffs might not come into play, at least as extremely as they had thought.
So I guess, Lydia, for those who are of the persuasion that the president has too much power in this regard, and that under Article 2 of the Constitution, Congress's role here, that they should have more authority, Congress should have more authority. Did any of these rulings, I guess, move that along with people who are of that persuasion that give the tariff policy back to Congress?
Yeah, so one of the decisions, the one at the U.S. International Trade Court, was pretty clear that their role was to help define the statute, that they were trying to parse through what Congress had authorized in the trade law known as IEEPA, which is the authority under which the reciprocal tariffs as well as the fentanyl tariffs had gone into place. And that legislation really was Congress, what seemed to be Congress delegating a great deal of authority to the president to both declare an emergency, and then once he does that, having the ability to impose tariffs as he would choose. But the interesting jurisprudence behind this actually is that IEEPA was put in place to help actually constrain an earlier law, the Trading with the Enemy's law, that Nixon had actually used to do just that. To interpret it with very broad latitude of what constituted an emergency that would allow him to enact some trade controls. And Congress did weigh in on that and said that was too much authority. We're going to constrain you with this new law, IEEPA. And they were very, very clear and specific that you can still declare an emergency, but there are limitations on the things that you can do in that regard. And it's really interesting because Trump has said that the reason the emergency that he has declared, setting aside the fentanyl emergency, but on the reciprocal tariffs, the reason is a trade deficit, us buying too many goods from foreign countries, and the U.S. not feeling like they're getting their fair share on that. But Congress was very clear in their IEEPA limitations that anything related to balance of payments, which is the broader bucket that trade deficits fit into, that there are very specific constraints on what tariffs or actions can be imposed by the president in that type of consideration. And it really can't be declared as an emergency. And there are sort of short-term effects. You only get about 150 days to impose something that messes with our balance of payments. So there are limitations. And so far, Jamieson Greer, he chose not to go that route with these tariffs. They went with the broader, bigger potential option to have as much latitude. But this court is saying, we actually think you've overstepped here, and Congress actually hasn't given you this authority.
Right. So this is an Article 2 versus Article 1 branch of the Constitution fight. I mean, that is playing out. I mean, is it safe to say, is it right to say that Congress ceded their Article 1 authority to impose levies and taxes a long time ago, and the executive ran with it? Is that what we're seeing play out? Because I want to harp on the emergency notion of this. These rulings, these two rulings in federal court over the last 24 hours, does this disabuse people in the Trump administration, the president himself, that you can't call everything an emergency?
This was a concern even under the previous administration and under other administrations, that it is true. Congress has delegated a great deal of its authority to the executive branch, including giving authority, relatively broad authority to declare something an emergency with very loose criteria about what that actually is or what constitutes an emergency. And there are also limitations on how Congress can then decide when an emergency is over, because the way it's set up now, they can declare it over, but then the president can override that vote in Congress. So there's a great deal of concern that the Congress really has delegated a lot of its authority, but it's not just in this emergency emergency authority component. Congress has done this with a lot of basic decisions, with delegating to executive branch agencies a lot of the nitty-gritty of laws, and Congress really doesn't have much of an incentive to take that responsibility back. They get to take the credit for when things are good, and when things are bad, they just say that's the executive branch's fault. And I'm afraid we've kind of gotten ourselves into a little bit of a bind where I don't know how Congress where will they get the gumption and the courage to take back some of this responsibility? They seem to be happy to delegate it to the executive branch.
I mean, to your point, yeah. I mean, once the toothpaste is out of the tube, it's hard to put it back in there. So I just have to ask this as well. Liberation Day was April 2nd. We know what was levied against the global markets and countries across the world. And then it was put on pause for 90 days. And then the Trump administration said, one by one, we're going to try to negotiate separate trade deals with all of these countries. Where are we right now? Is there a baseline rate still in place even after these rulings today? I mean, where do you think the Trump administration is going to take this moving forward?
Well, it seems like they're still going to continue to have their negotiations. And one of the big risks about this internal concern of our courts within the U.S. is I imagine the administration is a little concerned because it kind of dampens their leverage in these negotiations. Because the broad goal here, we should remember, was multifaceted, but one of them being getting other nations to trade more fairly with us. And so I do think that the end goal is to get to a more even playing field on both sides, but likely we're likely to end up with tariffs higher than they were before Liberation Day.
Okay.
And I think that that's the end goal there.
Right.
Although there's a debate, should Congress be the one to implement that rate rather than the president?
So something we've talked about, just lastly, a lot is the kind of relationship between the executive branch, the president, and the Federal Reserve and the Federal Reserve chairman. Well, Powell and Trump met today in the Oval Office. The Fed says this, that at the president's invitation, Chair Powell met with President today at the White House to discuss economic developments, including for growth, employment, and inflation. Chair Powell did not discuss his expectations for monetary policy, except to stress that the path of policy will depend entirely on incoming economic information and what that means for the outlook. Finally, Chair Powell said he and his colleagues on the FOMC will set monetary policy as required by law to support maximum employment and stable prices, and will make those decisions based solely on careful, objective, and non-political analysis. What do you think they talked about? Did Trump ask Powell to cut interest rates? Did Jerome Powell say, I'm not going anywhere in this job? I thought that was interesting at the president's invitation. Do you think they worked out some of their disagreements? It's been kind of tense at President Trump's urging on social media.
Yes, it has been quite tense. And Powell has been very clear. Many folks had asked him at his last press conference, have you talked with the president at all? And he said, no, I do not reach out to sitting presidents. This is not part of my role. That makes the Fed too political. So it's rather fascinating that shortly after Powell made that statement, you maybe a couple weeks after, but you have a meeting with the president set up at the president's invitation. I have a feeling they talked about the broader economy. Trump probably talked about his goals and how he viewed the role of the Fed and their role in interest rates and how he was looking for lower interest rates. I have a feeling Powell probably stressed the economic data to him, probably much like he does in the FOMC press conferences, where he explains, look, this is what the hard data is telling us, and this is the role of what the Fed is doing, and so we're going to stay the course unless the data changes. I do wonder if there was a bit of a economics lesson in there about the role of tariffs and inflation and how they might affect the price level and how that may dampen economic growth and how that might not help the president achieve his longer term goals. So I can at least, the econ geek in me can hope that conversation took place as well.
All right. Lydia Mashburn-Newman, as always, I know we went a little long, but there was a lot to get to. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, in the meantime here, some of President Trump's economic advisors spoke outside the White House today in relation and response to the news that this federal appeals court, for now, reinstated most of President Trump's tariff policy. This is Kevin Hassett. He's the director of the National Economic Council outside the White House this afternoon. Let's listen.
The legal challenges, the on and off again tariffs, does it undermine negotiations with other countries?
No, not at all, because the bottom line is that we are very, very confident that we're going to get this positive result, and we're even more confident that we're going to win in the end. You got to understand that Jameson Greer, the U.S. Trade Representative, is the smartest trade lawyer on earth, and that he chose this as the best option because it works fast, it gets us to the table with our trading partners, and it's going to hold up in court. And so if, heaven forbid, if it ever did have trouble in the future, we've got so many other options on the table that the president's policy is going to be there, enduring, and is going to make America great again, put America farmers first, and so on.
Should we be expecting an announcement on those other options soon?
Oh, those are well known. They're well studied. There are other options, parts of the trade law.
But using them, actually using
we won't have to use them because we're using this, and it's been upheld in court.
Given the
this guy gets to go first, but I promise I'll take a couple. Yeah.
Given the uncertainty, obviously, that this is introduced, going back and forth with the court, the first term, you guys put in tariffs successfully using these other pathways. Why not just do those again the first time? Was it a mistake to, try this other new one, and now we're kind of back in a position where you may have to use the original pathway?
This is a legal strategy that was designed by the best legal minds in the business, and the fact is that a lot of the stuff that happened in the previous term while I was here, 2017, were challenged in court as well. And so this is a normal cycle of what happens when there's trade law changes, and we're highly confident in the end result of the way we chose because it's been so scrutinized carefully by the people at USTR and other lawyers in the government, career lawyers often too.
The Treasury Secretary had said, I think last week or a couple weeks ago, that there were a number of deals in the pipeline. He expected that there would be agreements in the next couple of weeks. I mean, given this, is that still the expectation that in the next week or two?
That's the expectation. Yes, that's right. I've been briefed on 3 that I think are about to happen, but I'm not going to speculate which ones. I know that's your job to ask that, but I'm not going to speculate because in the end the president decides, and so something that we think is close to the finish line, it could be he decides to go back to the beginning and add some more things and so on. So we'll wait and see. And I'll get back to you, but I got to go to the people here first.
Can I ask you a question?
But you had a question too. I did know. Yeah.
Amanda Hill with Just the News. I know there was a lot of stipulation that, or a lot of recommendation that India was going to be the next country when it came to a major deal. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no thoughts on specific countries, but we've had lots of productive conversations with India. I had a wonderful meeting with their ambassador just recently, and so we're hopeful about that, but we're not going to put anybody ahead of the queue until the president decides to announce.
I'll let you go first.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Mr. Hassett, Larry Kudlow said on Fox that the bill that President Trump has endorsed, the big beautiful bill, is going to put more money in Americans' pockets. Can you name one way that will happen?
I could name a whole bunch of ways, but if we don't tax tips, then when you have your tip income, then the government's not taking any away. If you don't tax overtime, then the way it's in the bill is if you get paid time and a half, then you get taxed on time, but not the half. And so that half is a lot of money. I met the president of the United Auto Workers in my office a couple of weeks ago, and he said in some of the plants that are really running all out, that there are people that are getting 20 hours a week overtime, being paid 50, 60 bucks an hour. So it's real money for real people, especially real middle class people that need it the most.
When will no tax on tips go into effect?
We'll see when the bill passes and what the final language is, but as soon as the bill passes, then we expect it to happen.
Kevin, you said this morning that there are no alternatives that you're working on to pursue when it comes to putting these tariffs in place, that you believe the way you're doing it now will ultimately prevail. Peter Navarro just told us that they are looking at alternatives.
Oh, no, if I said that, then I misspoke, because there's so many ways to do it. But the point is we're highly confident in this way. But there are so many ways to do it with 301s in the past. And anyway.
So why not implement those now while this is fighting it out in the courts?
Because this is going to work. This is going to win. We're very, very confident this is the right approach. And so we're very adamant that this is the right approach, and so while we're ready for a backup plan that's never going to happen because this is going to work, then we're confident that this is the right approach.
We've been talking about sort of the other mechanisms that the administration could use to legally justify these, but one mechanism that couldn't face any court challenges is Congress, right? The Constitution ultimately grants Congress the power to regulate trade. So with Republican majorities in both chambers, why not ask lawmakers to pursue your trade agenda?
Well, right now we're working on the big beautiful bill, and the trade policy we have the authority to do from the White House, and so we view this as a better approach. And in addition, what President Dunn has started a negotiation that's moving a lot of pieces. So what we're doing is we're opening up foreign markets to U.S. products in a way that's never happened before, and that's the kind of thing with all these moving parts that's best done through the authorities that we have, rather than trying to negotiate every nuance of what happens with U.S. beef in the UK and so on. So there's a lot of country-to-country relationship management for each trade bill, and that's the thing that we believe is best done at the executive branch, and that's why we're doing it that way.
Do you have any concern about the impact on businesses, the impact on the economy of just the prolonged uncertainty, whether or not it's the court's fault or whether or not the fact that this is just kind of dragging out now, and businesses essentially don't know how exactly to plan, going forward?
No, I'm not that worried about the uncertainty. In fact, if you look, we've had really strong jobs numbers. We had an explosion in capital spending in the first quarter, 20% equipment spending up, 10% overall capital spending. And so what's happened is that the belief, it's not the uncertainty, the belief, the high confidence that President Trump is going to land this plane is making everybody create jobs in the U.S., move factories in the U.S., and we're seeing it in the data. And so I don't think that there's a heck of a lot of uncertainty where we're going to, maybe someone wonders, is the rate going to be this or that at the margin? But I think people are highly confident that President Trump is going to land this plane, and that's why there's so much activity coming to the U.S., why job creation is so high, and why, by the way, we just had one of the biggest increases in consumer sentiment that we've ever seen, because people understand, oh, now I understand what's going on, I see that this is going to happen, and I'm planning accordingly.
Have you spoken with any business groups, chamber or business roundtable since this decision, just about how they're...
which decision? I haven't spoken with anyone today,
I guess
but I speak every day in all sorts of groups. I've met with groups yesterday.
Were you in the room today for the president's meeting with the Federal Reserve Chair?
Yes, I was.
And how would you describe how that meeting went?
I think that the chair issued a statement about it, and I agree with the statement.
Though you agree with Jerome Powell's statement?
The issue, yes.
And did the president express his displeasure? How did he express his displeasure?
If you look at True Social, the president's opinion that interest rates could be lower right now is very clear and very public.
So he repeated his Truth Social post, basically.
I won't talk about what happened at the Oval, but the president's views are very clear.
Yes. Can I ask you, the Section 232 investigations that were ongoing before this court?
Okay, so that's Kevin Hassett. He's the National Economic Council director there, speaking outside the White House after the Trump administration got a victory today after this federal appeals court ruled in their favor, reinstating the Trump tariff policy, albeit temporarily until Trump administration lawyers can get their arguments ready to go. So we'll just have to wait and see how this all unfolds from here.